Walk into almost any equipment shed on a small American farm that survived the 1980s. And somewhere in the back, behind the newer machines, you'll find one. Small, gray, simple, a tractor with a name on it. That didn't come from Illinois or Iowa. It came from England. While American manufacturers were racing to build bigger, faster, more expensive machines that needed dealership technicians and computer diagnostics to fix, a small gray tractor from Coventry, England, was quietly doing something that no marketing department ever celebrated. It was keeping small farms running. This is the story of the British tractors that helped American farms survive, and why almost nobody talks about it. In 1946, an Irish inventor named Harry Ferguson launched a tractor from his Banner Lane plant in Coventry, England. He called it the TE20. Farmers called it the Little Grey Fergie. It produced about 20 horsepower, small even by the standards of its own time. But it had something no other tractor in the world had yet. A 3-point hitch with hydraulic draft control, a system that let the tractor and its attached implement work as a single unit, automatically adjusting depth and leveling as it crossed uneven ground. It made one man on a small tractor as productive as a much larger crew. With horses, over 500,000 were built. By 1948, an American version called the TE20 was rolling off the line and gaining ground against Ford. In the U.S. market, it was light, it was simple, and critically, it was the kind of machine a farmer could repair himself in his own shed with tools he already owned. That last detail would matter more than anyone realized. For the next 40 years, before the Little Grey Fergie ever reached America, Harry Ferguson had already changed how American tractors worked. In 1938, Ferguson demonstrated his 3-point hitch system to Henry Ford personally. Ford was impressed enough to make a deal on the spot. A handshake agreement. No contracts. No lawyer. Just an agreement between two men. That Ford would build the tractor. Ferguson would supply the hitch system, and they would split things fairly. The result was the Ford-Ferguson 9N, launched in 1939. It sold for $600, $100 more than competing tractors from Alice Chalmers or International Harvester's Farmall. Ford argued it was worth it. By 1942, the Ford-Ferguson had captured 20% of the American tractor market. 100,000 of them were already working American fields. The handshake didn't last. By the mid-1940s, Ford ended the partnership. Ferguson sued for patent infringement and eventually won a settlement of over $9 million. But the damage, or the gift, depending on how you look at it, was already done. The 3-point hitch became the standard that every tractor manufacturer in the world would eventually copy. An Irishman's idea, proven on a small gray tractor, quietly became the backbone of how every farm in America would work the land for the rest of the century. In 1953, Ferguson merged with Massey Harris, a Canadian company, to form Massey Ferguson. The new company combined British engineering philosophy, simple, durable, reparable, with the manufacturing reach to sell across North America. Through the 1960s and 70s, Massey Ferguson tractors became a common sight on small and mid-sized American farms. They weren't the biggest, they weren't the flashiest, but parts were available. Manuals were straightforward. A farmer with basic mechanical skill could keep one running. For decades, when the 1980s crisis hit, and farmers across the Midwest couldn't afford new equipment or the financing to buy it, these tractors didn't need replacing. They needed an oil change, a new gasket, maybe a rebuilt carburetor. The American manufacturers were focused on the farmers, who were borrowing big to buy bigger machines. The British-rooted machines were already in the shed, already paid for, and already running. Massey Ferguson itself faced serious financial trouble in the early 1980s. The same crisis that was crushing the farmers who depended on it. The company that built the tractor nearly didn't survive the decade. The tractor did. In 1947, a British engineer named Frank Perkins took a Fordson tractor and did something unusual. He converted it to run on one of his own diesel engines. Ford noticed. They sent Perkins 2 more Fordsons for conversion. The result was the Fordson Major, a tractor that ran on diesel. Years before American manufacturers made it standard, diesel engines were tougher. They lasted longer. They cost less to run. Over 23,000 of these early diesel Fordsons were built before 1952. Many of them eventually made their way to American farms, imported, often secondhand, by farmers who'd heard that the British diesel engines simply didn't wear out the way American gas engines did. A Fordson Major from the early 1950s could still be found running on small American farms well into the 1980s and beyond, not as a novelty, as the tractor that did the morning chores, because it always started, always ran, and never asked for anything but fuel and oil. Today, every tractor sold in America, John Deere, Case, New Holland, Kubota, uses some version of the three-point hitch that Harry Ferguson perfected on a small gray tractor in Coventry. Nobody puts that in the advertisements. It's not a feature anymore. It's just how a tractor works. So fundamental that it's invisible. The same is true of the tractors themselves. The British and British-rooted machines that filled American sheds during the leanest years weren't celebrated in farm magazines. They didn't get names like the tractor that saved the farm. They were just there, working, starting, getting fixed in an afternoon, instead of waiting 3 weeks for a part from a dealership that might not survive the decade either. Quiet machines, quiet survival, the kind of story that doesn't get told because nothing dramatic happened. The tractor just kept running. Nobody writes songs about parts availability. Nobody puts "easy to fix in your own shed" on a recruiting poster. But for thousands of small American farms, the difference between surviving the 1980s and not came down to something as unglamorous as a tractor that didn't need a computer to tell you what was wrong with it. The British tractors that crossed the Atlantic weren't trying to save American farming. They were just built the way machines used to be built. Simple enough to last, simple enough to fix, and simple enough that nobody ever needed to write a story about them. Until now. New stories every week on Deep Furrow.